And so a lot of Africans wonder if this isn't a preview of what will come to be if we allow these Western values creep into our society. Welcome back to the channel, I'm Rex. It's old news at this point, but still worth talking about. So the Parliament of Ghana officially passed the Human Sexual Rights and Ghanaian Family Values Bill, commonly referred to as the Anti-LGBTQ Bill, on the 28th of February this year. The bill is just a couple of days old, and it's already facing stiff opposition from Western governments, with some officials warning of economic consequences if this bill is signed into law. Now, in what form these consequences would take, we have to wait and see. It's unlikely the country would suffer any real economic sanctions if this bill is signed into law. However, individual sanctions are still very feasible. The Speaker of Parliament particularly, as well as some key sponsors of the bill, may suffer a measure of Western sanctions if this bill is signed into law, but that's all to be expected. They've been warning us for years. I'm going to summarize the key elements of this bill in its current form, and then we're going to talk about something very important. So, the bill prescribes LGBTQ+ activities, so essentially banning it under Ghanaian law, and criminalizes its promotion, advocacy, and funding. Persons caught in the act could suffer a minimum sentence of 6 months and a maximum sentence of 3 years in prison. Promoters and sponsors of the act will also suffer a 3 to 5 year prison term. The bill also requires citizens and institutions to promote and protect human sexual rights and Ghanaian family values. Now, this bill is going to be subject to a lot of debate and interpretations as the days unfold, some arguing whether prison sentences are really necessary and what its implication is going to be on free speech in the country. But beyond the passage of this bill, I want to talk about how we got here as a country. Why now, after all these years, is the Parliament of Ghana taking such actions against this community? What escapes a lot of Western activists is the fact that Ghanaians over the years have been fairly accepting is not the right word. It's more like indifferent about the practice of homosexuality in the country. It is not something most Ghanaians support or encourage, but it's also nothing new to us. After all, they are present in our communities, in our schools, especially senior high schools. I believe senior high schools are where most Ghanaians gain their first encounters with members of this community, especially the first 2 alphabets. I personally went to a mixed senior high school, a mixed Catholic senior high school, and even in that religious setting, they weren't difficult to identify on campus. They were few, but they were free. I mean, as far back as I can remember, having even served as a prefect back then, they weren't bullied, at least not in my school. And my school was in every sense a highly conservative religious institution, founded on Catholic principles. So you can imagine. On a lighter note, when a guy, usually a handsome guy, came out gay back then, the rest of us would be like, amen. One less guy to worry about. It was a mixed school, so you get the idea. Point is, once upon a time, people didn't care much what your sexual preferences were in this country. There are exceptions, of course, but largely, Ghanaians didn't really bother themselves much with the homosexual community. And it's not just in our schools, even in our communities. I've personally been approached a couple of times by homosexuals in very public spaces, and I never really think much of it. I usually just turn them down politely and carry on with my day. A lot of straight Ghanaians have been approached in that manner by homosexuals in our communities, and they suffer little to no chastisement most of the time. Now, in recent years, there's been a growing uproar against the LGBTQ+ community in Ghana and Africa at large, and here's my theory behind why. So the modern-day LGBTQ+ movement, which is mostly of American origin, started making major strides for freedom and acceptance somewhere around 1969. Now, I'm not going to bore you with any history, but it's taken in excess of 5 decades to transform America into the accepting society it is today. And even so, just last year in 2023, there are about 510 anti-LGBTQ+ bills introduced in the US, with about 75 of them getting passed into law. So it's somewhat laughable when countries like the United States and Britain believe they can accomplish in Ghana within a decade or two what took them in excess of 5 decades to only partially accomplish in their own countries. Another thing we tend to overlook is the fact that these movements started from within the American citizenry. It was mostly devoid of external influence. America wasn't influenced by Mexico or Canada or China. Most of the accomplishments they've made till date came through internal debates and compromises. But unfortunately, Africa doesn't have the liberty of deciding for itself. Other countries always want to impose their own ideals on the continent. And I believe that infuriates a lot of African countries. The bully into submission approach usually adopted by some of these Western countries. The former Prime Minister of Britain, David Cameron, tried that with Ghana during his tenure in office, and he faced stiff resistance from the then Atamos administration. The harder you push these agendas on Africans, the harder the pushback is. What happens when you try to impose, through dubious means, your own ideals upon other sovereign nations? They consider your actions to be aggressive, and they hit back hard. And unfortunately, the rather quiet and undisturbed gay communities get caught in the crossfire. And I believe that is exactly what is happening in Ghana. And then there's, of course, the reputation a section of the LGBTQ plus community have carved out for themselves. We see what is happening in the US.
We'll convert your children. Happens bit by bit, quietly and subtly, and you will barely notice it. Just like you worried, they'll change their group of friends. You won't approve of where they go at night to protests. Oh, and you'll be disgusted so gross when they start finding things online that you've kept far from their sight. I will convert your children.
And I'll admit this is not a true reflection of the entire LGBTQ plus movement, but that is enough to form a negative impression on the minds of conservative societies. What some consider to be pride and freedom of expression, others consider to be perversion at its peak. In Ghana here, we are trying to get our naked people off the streets, not put more naked people onto the streets. And so a lot of Africans wonder if this isn't a preview of what will come to be if we allow these Western values creep into our society. The complexity of the matter has made it even difficult for some of our top human rights lawyers to get involved. Lawyers are shying away from this discussion. There's a new dogma that you can be anything you want, as everything is now a social construct. Even race is considered a social construct according to some people. I can identify as a hot white babe in some countries across the world. It's laughable, but it's true. The boundaries we set to protect our children are becoming thinner. Biological men are now competing in female sports and breaking records. Biological men are winning Woman of the Year awards in some countries. So for most of us in Africa, it's not just about rights. Rights must go hand in hand with the truth. And what is true can be established through objective reasoning, regardless of our cultural and religious differences. I, for one, don't mind public debates on this topic. I'm all in for that. But as to whether this new bill would restrict that, that's another issue. In any case, Ghanaians are not ready for this new normal. At least not today. But for now, the bill is headed to the office of the president to be signed into law. And the president is not going to sign this bill into law. There are a number of bills the president has already refused to assent to. So I believe this bill is just going to end up being one of them. So maybe Sam George would have to take this bill back to his constituency and implement it there. Anyway, this is where I draw the curtains. Let me know what your opinions are in the comment section, and I'll catch you in the next episode.